Extremely glad that you are all here with us today and also the ones at home for the second day. It's a very special day dedicated to design-based approach, reflecting on the critique, let's say the most recent critique and ways forward from the point of view of research and practice. So I would like actually to welcome our Dean, Dick van Gameren, to introduce the session and the day. Please.
Thank you. It's really an honor for me to say just a few words at the beginning of the second day of what I think is really a great, wonderful conference. So I really first have to start with thanking those who took the initiative and organized this. So I'm looking at Chris, but also Tanea and many others in this room. Welcome in our faculty. For some of you, it's the first time, but I also see many familiar faces. Unfortunately, I have too many other things to attend in these very busy weeks before our spring semester ends. Otherwise, I would really have enjoyed attending the whole conference. And Chris told me you had a very good day yesterday in the Kunsthal in Rotterdam. I think a very inspiring environment, and I hope the environment of our faculty today will be just as inspiring for you. The program, I think, today is certainly very promising, so I'm confident you will have a great second day of your conference. Maybe just to say a few things and to put the conference also maybe in the wider perspective of the ambitions of our faculty, but also a bit personally what I'm doing myself still. Next to my work as a dean here, I still try to do some teaching. And at this very moment, I'm working together with the Bengal Institute for Architecture, Landscape and Settlements, beautiful name, on an architecture design studio. We focus on affordable housing, but housing in on the edge of Dhaka, and of course that has been already addressed, I know, yesterday. If we talk about deltas and everything that is happening, changing and threatening life in the deltas, Bangladesh, of course, always comes forward as a prime example of how vulnerable our landscapes and deltas are. And 6 weeks ago, we were with a group of 10 students from Delft visiting Dhaka. Next week, 10 students from Dhaka will arrive here, and then we will, in a working session together next week, wrap up our studio. But 6 weeks ago, we were there, and this is what we saw at the edge of Dhaka. So you see the city expanding in the endless expanse of the delta. And it looks quite friendly, but once you go in, you also see the things that are happening. We took a boat, obviously. That's the main way of moving around on the edge of the city. And of course, it's beautiful, although this was the driest part of the year. It's still incredibly green and fertile, the landscape. But you see things happening, and maybe you notice already almost at the horizon, underneath these beautiful trees, you see some red earth. And if you walk around, you see the residents of the village doing what they already do for centuries, harvesting rice. But you also see the signs of commercial developers who intend, without any formal regulations or permissions, it's all kind of illegal developments, they're going to make landfill, divide the land in plots, and then it's up for sale. Making roads to make it accessible by car instead of by boat. And then this is what you see happening, all this landfill. And it was going on in front of our eyes. And of course, making clear that, of course, this is a way of building in this very vulnerable landscape, but also creating a lot of problems for the future. And this is what we also I always say we are just architects in our studio. We cannot solve all these issues, but what we're trying to address with our students is how can you build in another way without landfill or maybe with other strategies, good and affordable housing for the people that still flock in great numbers to Dhaka. We work on that project with the Bengal Institute, with Professor Qazi Ashraf, but also with Marina Tabassum, who has been here a visiting professor already some years ago and who will also come back. And I think who shows also in her projects in the south of Bangladesh how even architects can try to address the issues at stake in this delta. And yeah, so I think it's wonderful that you, with your larger perspective and horizon as landscape designers, urbanists, address these issues. And obviously not only in Bangladesh, but all over the world, starting from our own country, the Dutch Delta. So thank you for doing that. And I say that really, I think on behalf of the faculty as a whole, this is... It's now known as het ballenschema van Dick, but I can't help that. But this is a kind of diagram that tries to show, let's say, the main lines of research and education that we think are crucial at this moment to address as a faculty of architecture and the built environment. Starting with these three big societal challenges that have an immediate connection on the built environment. Urban inequality, also very clear, of course, in the case of Dhaka that I just showed, the climate crisis, also very visible there, and the growing scarcity or lack of resources, which is also there very much at stake, but not only there, as I said, but we see that all over the world. So we try to find perspectives, a future and strategies to address these challenges. And to make that also very concrete for ourselves, for our students, but also for the world outside the faculty, we have identified at this moment 4 ongoing research projects and education projects in our faculty that on the different scales that we as a faculty need to address, look at these big challenges. So there's obviously, let's say, on the scale of the material, of the detail, of the way how we build projects, looking at the materials and how to design with them of the future, with obviously a strong focus on wood and glass as the main materials which we have to build. The New Open, a project that looks at, we are now living in the world of data, where digitalization takes command in almost everything. How can we connect those developments actually to design? And then with a focus on the scale of buildings, because we think that is still a subject, a development that is little explored, certainly in academia, maybe now more in practice than in academia, and we want to bring that in the faculty as well. Then it's a bit of a mix of Dutch and English, like we always do in our faculty, ruimte voor wonen, space for living, which is very much related, of course, to the issue of urban inequality. How can we build good and affordable housing in the Netherlands, right, where we also consider to be in a housing crisis, but all over the world we see the same conditions, certainly also in Dhaka that I just showed. And then, and I think that's really our big flagship, and that's why I'm so happy to be able to open today's part of the conference, the Redesigning Deltas project, because I think this is really where also the other 3 flagship projects, but all these challenges come together. So I hope you have an inspiring day and that you will help us also as a faculty to start thinking more deeply and more consistently about all the issues related to our deltas and how to redesign them. So thank you for coming, and again, I hope you have a great day here. Daar zit het.
Fields contributing to the issue of our, let's say, program / movement, Redesigning Deltas. So different from yesterday, today we have a quite dense and rich program of, let's say, diverse activities. So we hope you have enough energy to stay with us for the entire day. And just to give you a little bit of an overview, so we start the morning now with our plenary session on design. So dedicated again to design the agency of so design itself, the question of design, the agency of it, the critique and representation. And then we follow this plenary session in the morning with a small lunch break of 1 hour. But actually, also the lunch break, you have activities to attend. So quite entertaining. You're going to have your lunch bag, and you can just walk through our faculty and, explore the building. And 2 exhibitions which will be then opening. We have 1 exhibition dedicated to the Mekong Delta, Vietnam, developed by Sylvie Tram from EPFL Lausanne in collaboration with our research group, Delta Urbanism. She has been visiting us for the past 6 months, and in the meantime, she developed this beautiful exhibition that you can see in room BG West 510. There is also, in parallel to that, the opening of a design exhibition of, let's say, of the end of the year of our graduation studio, Transitional Territories, which is a studio of our research group, Delta Urbanism. And that one, you can visit the South Serre, basically the medallion of the central model hall space. So if you still have sufficient energy, we move to the afternoon session, in which then we have 9 international deltas in dialogue. We start with room 1, which is dedicated to the coast, and that room, we have the Dutch Delta, the Southwest Delta, within, let's say, reflected within the wider context of the North Sea. So you're going to see basically that we have 5 dedicated rooms. Each room has a theme, which was in a way, the common, let's say, theme that we could use to guide, to steer the dialogue between deltas. We moved then to the second room, parallel room, number 2, with the theme river, actually the transport corridor, and especially we're very much focusing on the question of the river management within the context of deltas. And then we have the Tana River Delta in Kenya in dialogue with the Paraná Delta in Argentina. Room 3, the theme, it's the transition between urban and rural-urban. And for that room, we have the Pearl River Delta in China and the Mekong in Vietnam. Finally, room 4, theme after nature, in which we have then in dialogue Niger Delta in Nigeria and the Ganges Brahmaputra Delta in Bangladesh. And then finally, room 5, dedicated to the theme of energy and actually, let's say, the energy transition, petrochemical industries, and very much the question of harbors, of, let's say, within the context of deltas, their economic and political driver and importance and transition that they are now facing, and in which then we have the Po Delta in Italy in dialogue with Houston, Galveston Bay in the US. Now, after these parallel sessions that you are all invited to join, so we're going to have our technical moderators by the end of the plenary this morning, gathering the ones that would like to, let's say, the different 5 rooms, and the ones of you that would like to join one of those rooms, please, you're going to be invited to do so in the afternoon. We also have part of those rooms, we're going to have a number of experts from the specific deltas, which were especially invited to join the conversation online. So we have experts joining us on site, but also we have a number of experts, a very rich program, let's say, of experts joining us online. We also have, alongside with that, our design study of redesigning deltas. So the 5 teams that started the study about 2 months ago, they will join us in the sessions, each one, let's say, group per session, to briefly expose to us what were their key findings until now, and again, ways that they see the project moving forward. So a very lively and, we hope, a very constructive discussion and dialogue in the afternoon. And then we close the session because, well, we're going to be here for the day. So to take some air, to enjoy the sun and enjoy the beautiful campus, then we're going to go for a walk. And we're going to cross the entire campus and close the session in the Green Village, the co-creation pavilion. So also the name of the pavilion is quite, I think, promising for what actually we are trying to do here with you in these 2 days to co-create this program together. So we're going to be in the pavilion closing then the conference in which then we're going to invite the chairs of the 5 rooms to expose the findings. So what were the key points that they discussed in the afternoon to all of us, again, plenary. And then we're going to have our moderator, Eric Lowton, making let's say, the final points. And then there is the final short exhibition opening in which actually you're going to see a small comparison of the 9 deltas called Transformations, Translations. So, well, I hope you're going to enjoy the day. And before further ado, I would like actually to welcome very much indeed our first guest of today, which is amazing, Charles. I can tell you that you are the only one of all our international guests that were able actually to fly.
And
we have 6 constellations. Oh. So it's really amazing that you were able to, well, it's quite stunning that you were able to arrive here. I would like to understand what
the sole survivor.
What you did, what happened, because it's really, yeah, I'm constantly in the phone actually because of that. We have Bas Prinsen that just landed in Schiphol, so yeah, so it's, well.
And Adrian?
And Adrian, we don't know. So maybe he lost his flight from Rotterdam.
I'm in.
She's there. Please then join us in the front. Thank you. So you have, let's say, this. You are the representative of all the international guests that were not able to be with us today, but they will be with us online. But anyway, Charles Waldheim, it's John Irvin, Professor of Landscape Architecture and Director of the Office for Urbanization at the Harvard University Graduate School of Design. He's an American-Canadian architect and urbanism. Waldheim research examines the relation between landscape, ecology, and contemporary urbanism. He's author, editor, or co-editor of numerous books on these subjects, and his writings has been published and translated internationally. Waldheim is the recipient of the Rome Prize Fellowship from the American Academy in Rome, the Visiting Scholar Research Fellowship at the Study Center of the Canadian Center for Architecture, and the Culunian Chair at Rice University, and the Sanders Fellowship at the University of Michigan. Charles, it's an extreme honor, it's an enormous honor to have you with us. I learned this morning that it's the first time that you visit this building, so a great honor to have you, and please, I think should I give the, thank you.
Okay, huh? Taneha, thank you so much for the invitation, Chris. Thanks. Yesterday was extraordinary. There's a lot more to say about that, but let me just begin by saying I'm so happy to be here. I didn't realize I'd be the only sole surviving international candidate. I'm not sure what that says. Maybe I need a better agent. Apparently you can do these online, and I could be with my family this weekend. So, but it's genuinely really an honor to be back at the TU Delft. And thank you, Dean Van Gameren, for your introductory remarks and for kind of shifting the focus internationally to Asia. My comments will be a little bit similar. It's always exciting when a dean assembles the faculty and puts up a diagram of the big project. As a former administrator, I can tell you as a member of the faculty, we're always kind of, where am I on the diagram, and where's the school going? So I'm really happy to be here and participate, and happy to contribute in a very modest way to these conversations. I was struck yesterday by a number of things. I mean, one would be simply the level of commitment across the disciplines. So you have civil society, the professions, you have, civic discourse, social sciences, a range of natural sciences, economics, all using the D word and seemingly meaning it And rhetorically, everyone's looking to make an argument somewhere, but ultimately it seems as though everyone agrees. You know, I mean, the basic playbook about the challenges that we face. I'm just struck by the unanimity and the sense of momentum that I felt yesterday. That this is a broader question for civil society, and we have technical expertise, and we have many challenges, but I'm really just heartened by that and really very, very pleased, very pleased to be here. My remarks will be a little bit maybe complimentary. It didn't strike me as coming from Harvard to lecture the Dutch about sea level rise made a lot of sense. And so think of what I'm going to contribute as a kind of compliment. And I want to situate my remarks in relationship to two of the speakers yesterday. So Tim Van Hutten spoke about food, right, and the notion of it not simply being about the delta, but the delta implicates what's upstream. Similarly, Paola Vigano mentioned what's coming downstream from the Alps. And so if we think about that broadened territory, I think we've had quite a lot of good conversation about the delta itself, the mechanics of it, the tensions between the economy of the port and the kind of ecological functioning of returning the river to some kind of life, and the idea of kind of living with nature. These things seem quite well evolved here. But what I want to contribute really has to do with the stresses on other parts of our civil society, other parts of our landscape. And in particular, my work in the past couple of years is focused on agricultural landscapes and their modernization, let's say. This is work that we do at the GSD through my research group called the Office for Urbanization. I know here, for example, you have your own challenges with your agricultural system. Nitrogen is a big question these days. We've heard a lot yesterday about moving towards circular economies. And my comments will be sort of a complement to that, focusing on circular agricultural agendas and goals. What I'm struck by in the conversation yesterday is the urgency to move toward adaptation. Of course, we all want to mitigate, we want to decarbonize our economy, we want to move to an electric economy and a circular economy. These things are quite clear. Having said that, in the built environment, what architects and landscape architects and urban designers and planners and engineers can do is really, I think, contribute to adaptation. And I view that adaptation as a really essential, potentially even existential condition for us. And that means that we can bring something quite particular, as every biome around the world is confronted with a series of challenges. They're all quite distinct, and I don't want to generalize from them. But having said that, I do believe that there are certain ways in which the delta and coastal vulnerability implicate our terrestrial systems more broadly, and in which agricultural work and kind of landscapes of, let's say, urbanization might be involved. We've been working on this project called 50 Species Towns recently. It's just published through the GSD, and it speaks to agricultural modernization in China. And I think there are ways in which this might relate to the conversations here, and so if you'll bear with me for a minute, I'll sort of continue the conversation in Asia. So obviously Eastern China, and East Asia more broadly, has been really prone to a series of anthropogenic climate change, extreme weather events, both sea level rise, but extreme events, storms, typhoons, all sorts of disruptions to both shipping, but also what's going on upstream. Increasing drought, desertification, really threatening agricultural production in China. And of course, we'll hear later in the day about other river deltas, but my conversation today will speak just to one of them, the Yangtze River Delta that you see just here, which is really, in addition to other things, the center of the kind of one of the great megalopolis of East Asia. In this regard, our kind of interior hinterland or countryside has been, of course, a topic of interest for many of us in the design world in the past several years. And in that context, I want us to move beyond, or I would recommend moving beyond the polarity between urbanization on the one hand and something like the wilderness or something like the hinterland outside of that model. In that context, my argument would be that these things are related, both the urbanization of the kind of Shanghai metroplex combined with the Yangtze River Delta produces a kind of assemblage, a kind of machinic assemblage at the vast territorial scale. And it's really very difficult to separate those things from one another. In response to these challenges, the State Party in China, beginning in 2013, developed a national strategy to begin to look at these effects And we can talk about that, the political context, both, kind of human rights abuses, challenging kind of societal conditions there. Having said that, I think that the challenges that we face are truly global. I think we all face them. And this is not a moment for us to parse between this system or that system. But I would argue that, in fact, beginning in 2013, the Chinese aspiration to a kind of national project is a little bit similar to what I heard yesterday about the potential for a Dutch national project. And I think in that sense, we can all benefit from these kind of shared experiences. I can tell you that the political economy in my country is very far from that as a project. We can talk more about that if you're interested. Beginning in 2016, the Chinese party developed an action plan for responding to these climate threats. And in that particular context, which is, of course, quite top-down, they identified the notion of delta cities as particularly vulnerable. And these are just a couple of examples in the context of the Yangtze River Delta and Shanghai. But interesting, and I think the reason that this might be relevant for this audience, I thought, was in 2016, the State Party also committed to a project of agricultural modernization. And this is not separate from their climate adaptation response, but in fact, it was a central element of that adaptation response. And of course, I know that the Dutch are kind of have this long agricultural history themselves, but at the same moment, I thought it might be interesting to push on that a little bit. Because in 2016, this agricultural modernization project of the party focused on improving the ability to sustain both the caloric production, but also the economic production of the Chinese agricultural village. The Chinese villages were historically the last aspect to be integrated into the modern economy after Deng Xiaoping's opening. And in some ways, they were also looking to take pressure off of the large river delta cities, right? Because the pressures of urbanization, generations leaving the village to move to the big city, leaving their children behind, leaving their grandparents behind, a whole set of social public health problems that stem from that. And so what we've been working on the past several years is a kind of counter proposal to that modernization project. Our premise is that as China looks to modernize, they've been consulting with Dutch universities and experts, they've been consulting with American universities and experts, how to increase their agricultural productivity. Of course, around their the four staple grains, kind of wheat and soy and rice. And as they do this, there is a great danger that they will, like we did in my country, erase their valuable culinary heritage, right? This is something that I think maybe we can talk more about in the Dutch context, but for us in North America, we long ago erased the kind of cultural heritage, not to mention the indigenous, kind of erasure of the indigenous populations. And so our work has been looking at the Chinese project of agricultural modernization, which are effectively a series of new town proposals. These are smaller towns, 50,000 people, 100,000 people, looking to both modernize agricultural production, but also to bring agricultural production into the broader modern neoliberal economy. As they do this, our proposal has been back to them to suggest that they might not revisit the history, the mistakes that we've made in the West in terms of erasing our cultural heritage through that kind of diversity of agricultural production. Among the Chinese responses to climate adaptation have been this notion of improving the living conditions, public health outcomes, the social conditions, the familial and economic potential of staying on the farm. And this is something, obviously, that they're challenged by. They're interested, ultimately, to develop unique and distinct economies that might combine something about unique productivity with desirable amenity and quality of life. They also are looking to simultaneously do what your culture and my culture did in the 20th century to kind of modernize our agricultural production, make it more efficient, to feed ourselves and the world, but also to engage in 21st century interests in moving away from pesticides, moving away from carbon-based fertilizers, and solving the nitrogen problem that I think we all share. In this regard, our counter-proposal has been to identify the 50 most vulnerable culinary species in Chinese cultural heritage. We've done this with United Nations support and partners working with Chinese experts. And ultimately, the idea of these 50 heritage crops frame a new approach to agricultural modernization. Our proposal is ultimately that no one wants to live in Newtown 47B. We sort of did that in the last century. But more importantly, or maybe more interestingly, we could adopt each of these kind of valuable cultural species as a kind of mascot or as a kind of symbol of some value. This notion is not my idea. It's really inspired by the work of Dr. Kang Jianyu, a colleague of mine. He's a landscape architect based in Beijing. His firm is called Tourinscape. Among other things, Kang Jianyu is maybe one of the more important landscape architects working in East Asia. He had the commission about a decade ago or so for the design of a new architectural campus, the Shenyang Architectural University campus. He found this was a site planning exercise that had been accomplished by his friends that were architects. They had planned the campus. They had erased the wet rice farming that was done on the site previously to make way for this new university campus as a part of their modernization. And in so doing, of course, the architects made extraordinary buildings and spent the entire budget. And so my friend Kang Jian accepted the commission, arrived with no budget, and said, well, what if we just put the rice back? And there's something, on one hand, Duchampian about this, right? There's a kind of no project there. But there's something maybe more deeply interesting, this kind of cultural literacy that Kang Jianyu for me has exhibited in his work. And I don't know, for those of you that have been there, it's an extraordinary place, not only because of this mix of a kind of the French parterre and the campus lawn. There's a kind of European and American campus tradition here, but there's this idea of going back to the rice. And the rice now forms the calendar of the year. They have planting festivals and harvest festivals, and they sell it in the campus bookstore, and it's the mascot for the sports teams. And the idea of the identity of this yellow rice becomes the identity of this community. This idea was so powerful for me that we developed it as a kind of counterproposal to the Chinese state as a way to avoid the challenges, avoid the mistakes that we've made in erasing the kind of cultural diversity that used to exist in North America. Don't worry, I won't share all 50 with you. But I do want to share just a couple of examples to give you a sense of what we're up to here. In this work, we're benefiting from the work of dozens and dozens of collaborators and colleagues, institutions and individuals in China and in the West. And I don't have time in this space to acknowledge all of them. But the premise here, as you can see on the right-hand side, a kind of encyclopedic list organized by latitude from north to south. The idea of organizing this town not from the point of view of where's the highway, where's the new airport, my uncle owns some land over here, this might be productive or help. Let's look at this from the point of view of the species. What would this plant look to express? And that's an admittedly perverse or very specific way, but there's something in that decentering that I found, for me at least, interesting and productive for our thinking. Each one of these species is identified in the cultural heritage, for example, right? The ginkgo biloba is a kind of incredibly important heritage crop in the context of Chinese history. But then they're also situated in terms of their climate zone, topography, soils, etc. We're interested here in the ways in which both the food lives, the foodways, but also the kind of cultural forms, the paintings and the poetry that come from these species. And equally, we're interested in the both morphology and typology of their growth. And you can see here what we're doing essentially is, responding to Christopher Alexander's, kind of the city is not a tree with well, maybe it could be. Let's have that conversation. Similarly, the peach is among the oldest domesticated fruits in China. There's something about this, coming from the West and going to China to advise them on how to think about urbanization, of course, is a bit of a paradox of modern life. Having said that, there's nothing more specific to a culture than what we eat, right? There's nothing more specific to Chinese cultural heritage. And in that regard, we've done quite a lot of work with a number of partners thinking about the growth cycle, the cultivation pattern, the landscape formation that these plants are cultivated in. And we've done this for the 50 most endangered of these species that are the most specific, interesting in both the landscapes that they form, but also the kind of cultural production that they afford. We just, by way of giving a little bit more context, a little more detail, I might be able to share one of those in a little bit more detail. This is the rapeseed. It's grown primarily in a continental winter dry climate zone. And it, of course, has its own unique set of valuable histories. The idea of surrounding around water a kind of circular agricultural practice, right, in which the waste product of the fish aquaculture produces the fertilizer for, in this case, the rapeseed crop, and the interplanting with a range of other species becomes quite important. What's interesting about this for me is not simply the idea of returning to this ancient practice. We're not being, conservative or preservationist, but there is something about the circular logic of these resources that, of course, we've lost in the modern era and that we look to in terms of circular economies and that I think we could benefit from. We're interested in the material culture of these things, their culture, their color, their texture. We're interested in the patterns of cultivation, that is, how do the fields change over the course of the seasons and the course of the year? And we're equally interested in the plant itself, its growth, its logics, the permutations. But that's all the foundation. That's the basis for understanding the meaning of these things. Because for me, I'm not really a plant guy. It's when these plants become meaningful to us, when we feed them to our children, when we build opera around them, or when we build a kind of, in this case, a kind of colorful seasonal festival, right? But then ultimately we return to their spatial logic and try to derive from the spatial logic of this species its own desires, in a way, to both decenter human authorship and agency for a moment, but also to kind of radicalize an approach that values cultural heritage beyond simply the economics and logics and efficiencies of infrastructure. Another element of these 50 new towns is that we've done a bit of work to understand how these places have been settled historically. In this case, in this region, the Haozu dwelling is the kind of classical typology, the kind of village type. And we've studied that by scanning thousands of built examples. One of our interests here is that the history of agricultural village types or block structures has been codified in the 1980s and 90s. There are 18 of these village types across China, and they've all been defined in a very, let's say, kind of classical typological definition, the sort of ideal body of a certain Haozu dwelling. We now have the capacity, based on a range of other digitalization techniques, to scan thousands of actual blocks to actually understand, well, now how do people actually live in this place? And from that, we then derive, you see this kind of X-ray here, which is a kind of aggregation. This is a minor part of the work, but it's one that we're interested in, which is a shift away from, let's say, classical medicine and the Vitruvian man, the ideal body, towards something more like population demographics. Ideal bodies are not so interesting ultimately, but actual bodies are fascinating, right? And the idea that we have access to thousands and thousands of examples, it's not that this invalidates a typological approach to urban form, but in fact, it substantiates it, it thickens it, and it gives us more meaning for us personally. From that knowledge, we then begin to derive block types that are more contemporary in relationship to a range of 7 densities, which really constitute the kind of densities and the scales at which Chinese agricultural new towns are being built today with our partners there, and in which we're looking to derive something of a spatial structure, a kind of morphology, and a spatial expression which can be seen to simultaneously accommodate new forms of urbanization, acknowledge the historic typologies of village life, while also looking to the morphology of this plant itself and trying to reconcile the kind of contradictions there, let's say. Now, there are limitations to this, and I'm interested to chat with you about them further, but ultimately, our goal is to derive a kind of counter model in which the future of these agricultural hinterlands might take pressure off the river deltas downstream, that might allow for a better quality of life, both public health, but also familial outcomes, that might allow people to return to the countryside, that might allow them to stay back in the countryside, and live in somehow a kind of, if not equilibrium, some sense of equipoise between the pressures they're placing downstream on the millions and millions that are living in extremity in the river delta, but also to relieve that pressure by producing a more sustainable, somehow a more cyclical and maybe a more resilient form of life back on the farm. So it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Invite our second speaker, keynote, Adrian. Just briefly introduce, it's a great pleasure to have you with us this morning. With such an amazing group of people in this first row seat. Adrian Hoos, Professor of Landscape Architecture at TU Delft, Department of Urbanism, co-founder and design director of West 8, one of the world's leading practice for landscape architecture and urban design. Based in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, and New York City, West 8 projects include the Kruller-Müller Sculpture Park in Otterlo, the Governor's Island Park and public spaces in New York City, and the Central Waterfront in Toronto. West 8 has received numerous awards, including the Dutch Maskant Award, the Rosa Barba First European Landscape Prize, the Veronica Rouge Green Prize for Urban Design, and the Lifetime Achievement Award in 2011 from the BKVB, the Netherlands Foundation for Visual Arts, Design and Architecture. A frequent lecturer and visitor professor at universities worldwide, Hoos was the curator of the 2005 International Architectural Biennale in Rotterdam. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I was asked by Chris Seelenberg to more or less give an introduction on the subject of, but Chris, you have to help me because you have another wording for that. Double security approach, is that a right word? Yeah? Can you explain what is that?
Multi-level safety.
Yeah, I knew you had a different word. Extra. Werkt het?
Just use this one as well. Both.
I cannot use my hands anymore now. Okay, multi-level. That's it. Today, a short introduction on two subjects, which are more or less, and I'm so much sympathizing with the research group here on faculty, on two subjects which I think should be part of permanent research, and I want to be part of at least one of these. So the Dutch are obsessed fighting the ocean, and that is the cultural obligation. We will not give up the land. No, we will be the last to give up the land. Yeah? This is true. So Chris is very concerned that this, for example, the polder system, newly built with the, maybe the fourth city of the Netherlands, Almere, and people live safely behind beautiful dikes engineered by craftsmanship and Delft knowledge. But if anything goes wrong, there's no way out. So it is a single security system, isn't it? It's mono-level. And what do we need? A multi-level security approach. So how can we do that? So we did a research for the International Architecture Biennale 2021 in Dordrecht. Dordrecht is very relevant because it is the mother of all water cities, and I'm a son of Dordrecht. You're not impressed, no? And so, and Dordrecht has a history last year memorizing the 600th anniversary of the St. Elisabeth flood. I don't go in detail. My childhood is this. I was born here, 25 meters from this picture, and my mom and dad met here. So this is it's pretty close, and I don't explain this, but you understand. And this is happening all the time. Dordrecht was born as a beautiful town, and then there was problems and regained land. And as you see, there's a triangle, an island, which is far below sea level. And the latest occupation, colonization, is called the Staart, which is a piece of land approximately on sea level. The rest is far down sea level. That's where the Dordrecht people live. You see that? And that is why we need to research multi-level security. The dikes are not a problem. So we learned from Japan, if there's a problem, what do I do? This is actually the question. It's very simple. You get, as soon as you can, from your house to a higher ground. This is not rocket science. But then we need to design these high grounds, explain to people that they are there, and let them go there over roads which are not lower ground but higher ground. This is the logic. That's what we did. So here you identify the GIS logic. A portion of the higher ground could be higher, 4.5 meters. That is, we would say, the minimum. You need a lot of debris, and then you build there a new town. And we tested a 7,000 working, living condition in between Wantij River and the Merwede. These are really poetic names, Merwede, Wantij. So that is a town to be born above sea level. And here you see that. And logically, you make then logistic, which is very important for the multi-level approach, a road system over this higher ground. So it is a backbone or a spine. You can use it for ambulances, but at daytime you can use, Monday morning you can use it for leisure and bicycling and commuting. So we should make designs for that, and these roads should be recognizable and more or less kiss every schoolyard and shopping center. So people use it every day and they know it. It's there, it's there, it's there. It's in their blood. No? Why not? So it is not a complex security system. Then at moments that water goes really high, even higher than a Maaslandkering, so the roads are there. And they are waiting to be used. But nevertheless, we train people to use them by adding, this is a neighborhood, an older neighborhood with a lot of social problems. So we make a community house, a public beach, a wave deck. And so we really explain them, and it's your place. It is your infrastructure. Use it, enjoy it. And it brings people all the way. Now, the next step is that we share the people who live deep down there in the blue, which is 100,000 people. If, and we cannot say the word if, because then the Dutch say, oh, the politicians are really scared. Don't say the word if, because you scare people. But if a Japanese person would immediately go on these kind of lines and then get on the higher ground, and you will be rescued. And then engineers will pump the water out of the polder, and you might come back later with a lot of dirt and mud. Okay, so these systems need to be designed, and we thought about introducing purple or pink roads that are on higher dikes or viaducts and stretch over barriers such as Wantij, and finally land on the right spot. Now, okay, the second, and this is very simple, but why don't we implement it?
We just
so the Dutch, yes, Charles, we know everything about Delta technology, but we don't do anything with it. We sell it for money, but in Holland, we stay conservative. We wait for the storm, and then after the storm, we say, why nobody acted? So for a long time, and now recently, we are very, and these three officers, and Chris, we need your help, because we need to be stitched in the scientific research, and we need more funds for this. We have the second statement, which is very relevant for making this kind of solutions. Depending what type of sea level rise you draw, this is a problematic area. And there is a very simple 2,000-year strategy, or building land above ocean levels. Maybe not everything, but at least enough land so you can go there. Life is simple. We have extraordinary work, our office within diverse consortia of building with nature, for example, the Hondsbosse Zeewering, to build, instead of a higher dike, a dune system offshore with new kind of underwater topography, creeks, and all type of different water. We see the same things happening along the Haringvliet. So new things should be done. Now, and here I knew Ronald was here. So what we now are doing, Charles, you don't understand that. So this is Rotterdam. North of Rotterdam is the deepest pit in the planet Earth. -7 meter under sea level.
And that seemed like a good idea.
It is 10 meter below storm level. That's a lot, no? And you know, they're gonna build a new city there, and all Delft is not stopping it. Deltares is not unplugging themselves and moving to Belgium or Germany, like give up Holland as a condition. The waterschappen, the water boards, they say, oh, minister, that's not a good idea. They should completely unplug themselves and say, go ahead, we are out, we are no longer part of this. And so I'm a little bit astonished that we all know we should build higher. So Ronald Waterman spent a whole life of making a very simple landfill on the coast, which could host a city and is the same subway line, and connects to the Hague subway lines. And wouldn't that be great? I want to live there, you know? It's a sort of, and it's not very complex. We do this all the time. In Belgium, they even do that. So the Belgium already adapt. But we gonna build in Zuidpaspolder. So we did a lot of systemic approaches and research. Now the complexity we are today is that by dredging sand from the North Sea, we are in an area of Europe where there's 4 internationals, really advanced technology, business-related dredge companies. They make a sort of rat race, and they are able, with the larger boats, to go up to €2 per cubic meter for sand excavation. If you're able to do this in large scale, you can literally raise Holland. That's not a big deal. You can do that. You need to get the price down. But how can we do that? So they speculate it could be better and bigger, but then the government should invest for 20 years. However, carbon, that's an issue, because this is gigantic amount of sand, needs a lot of pumping. You need to ship it, repump it, and that's not sustainable. So might not be the solution. Thank God we have TU Delft. Now we have to press the button. We have to cross campus and step, beyond, because we now need at least 5 faculties to deal with it. So one of the speculations that's not a big deal is that we research a floating system with wave energy or solar energy, which is making turbulence on the seabed and bringing slowly but permanently, 24 hours, 100 years, sand to a certain point where you can pick it up. Why not? I don't say we have this machine today, but if we cannot invent this machine with ESA and Delft University, then we have to stop this university. Why is Delft invented anyhow? For delta technology. That's the only reason. There was no other reason. The Germans did all mechanic, the English is steam engine. Delft was there on the planet to do the delta technology. And so, imagine we have a machine which, with a giant flipper system, pumping water, making turbulence, and spread sand. Why not? That is a better approach. Now, this should not be like, oh, I need some money, I'm going to dig here. That's very stupid, because we are here in Delft for systemic approaches. How can this mining deliver? It's not a problem. How can it work for us? How it can be beneficial? Is it clear, this question? So how can we do that? So the 3 offices, Waardenburg, Zwazek and Westade, started with this type of speculation. We want to proceed with more friends and partners. Now, what we learn, due to the fact that there is Delft, but no systemic approaches, ministers and institutions, they claim their portion of the North Sea, brainless. It is almost becoming like the Wild West. So this is the Netherlands, and the ocean is like cosmic space. You can do what you want. But there is congestion already, and it's waiting for problems, because we have most of the navigation channels through via the Dutch coastline. If there's ever a big accident with a windmill or whatever, then the Dutch coast is seriously threatened. So we should think about these things more systemically. Now, I bring together, and then I close three, why 1 + 1 is 5. So 3 points of view which can be combined. First, Waardenburg, their 50 years of ecology research, maritime research. They believe that the Dutch originally had the most amazing delta and sand system, above water and underwater. And we know these biotopes as a cultural phenomenon, but it's broader also into the ocean. In the water, there's more to see and more to learn. We don't even know half of that. So this whole ecosystem with plant lives. Last year we discovered we have coral banks. Nobody knew that. They are in the North Sea. And they bring birds and seals with transmitters, and they know where they are. It's amazing. So Waardenburg is permanently busy with that. Now in Holland, everyone is concerned that, wow, we have the Waddenzee. The Waddenzee is an amazing tidal estuary with a gully system, with beautiful underwater topography. And it's very precious, and we have to be careful. Waardenburg is very concerned that everyone forgets that we had 20 of these systems. We had the delta, which was lost as a tidal system, and where underwater topography is changing in a very quick way. I don't explain you all the details. The zandhonger. So the gullies get filled up with sand, and above water tidal plateaus disappear. But don't forget, we used to have the Zuiderzee as well. And what about the mouth of the River Rhine, the Beer? This all had been changed by technology. We lost recently the Lauwersee. So there is a lot of underwater topography with all the biotopes which were lost. So why don't we think about these as a sort of progressive ecological treasures which belong to us, which could be with us, and we can profit from that. The second point of view is Bureau Swazek. They are the most advanced hydraulic morphology researchers in the Netherlands. Sometimes they have more access to knowledge and speculation than Deltares. So we want to attach their tricks and speculation. So they have amazing software and data system about all of the North Sea currents, tides, storms, sediments, erosion, all these things, and they bring it in models. And then by computer you change the North Sea, and then the models speculate what happens. Now they figure out, and this is very simple, if you, for example, mine a creek system or a gully system at the North Sea, you won't understand this easily, but the computer is like, wow, what is this? They calculate every storm from the last 100 years from the Northwest. They figure out that due to a larger capacity of undercurrent, the water rising at the coast, because the undercurrent is stronger, is less. So in their computer, if you make this in the computer model and you send every storm to Holland, they say there is sea level drop at the coast. Now we can say the model is inaccurate, the data are too rough, this is not manicured. That's not a problem. We have 1,100 engineers at Deltares. We can do this model and calibrate it much better and try one to create one and test it and learn more and change, etc. If this is true, we win a lot of money and we make the next step. So they did research for this and they really have in the system, and it's 1 week of calculation. It's very expensive, and they do this in the weekends with us. The computer is working. We Monday get a report. And they test every storm, and they calculate some of the storms deliver sea level drop already in this model. So we should start, and I stop here, Chris, and this is the second point of the layer approach. If you do the layer approach, we need sand. And we don't need a little sand, we need million cubic meters of sand. And that's not a problem because it's all there. It lays there. And why not using it if we can make it more advanced? So don't give up, Holland. We have to raise the land and be clever. If we do systemic approach and we figure out underwater topography, then we can send the new robotic machines there. They will mine exactly for us on the right position, and we have a new and better ecosystem. And this is a 100-year plan. It's not, we don't do this Monday. So we can start at Zeeland. And of course, this is a diagram because Waardenburg explains that these kind of troggen, the Zeeuwse Hollandse troggen, underwater gullies, they might be 10 kilometers. It's not like there is a canyon there. It's not like that. So we mine a little bit in the texture sand layers, and we bring a buffer or a depot at the coast, which is delivering also above water biotopes. By the way, scientifically, there's evidence that if you excavate here, throw it on land, that you have more volume in the ocean. So we might compensate one glacier melted. So it doesn't do wrong for us. So, and then you can speculate that, for example, this is the very interesting underwater 4 delta system of the Netherlands, that you research for a system of new underwater topography, and you do researches on every layer systemically and also in larger scale. You bring the debris to the coastline, clack. Ronald, now it's for free. We go down, far down in the price, and we might speculate even that there is a release in the future of River Rhine, not via Rotterdam, but via Haringvliet, and we make the delta of that, Haringvliet, extended, because we need more linear tidal area domain since sea level rise and the river is not rising. And it might even be crazier that the 4 delta links to the mouth of the Oosterschelde, Westerschelde. So these kind of sand bodies can be used to bring sediment and debris to every problematic place in the Netherlands for the double layer system, multi-layer system. Then we should not make a very complex infrastructure exactly where the best underwater system should be designed. So it is not clever if you don't use the knowledge of this university and the Dutch institutes to make a more progressive, integrated approach for the different, this is the wind energy speculation. So this is where we hope that wind parks and this kind of mining sites work together to be able to stay above the waves and to be Dutch and to stay Dutch. We have no other option. We are not in philosophy. We are not writers. We don't have a kitchen. We are land makers. That's it. And painting the land. So, and then the Dutch people will be so happy to see the delta also above. And there will be new depots at the coastline, which are like, wow, I want to go there. And new wildlife and exciting domains to live and to enjoy. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Now we would like to invite our 2 first keynote speakers with our respondents to join us in the front. We just have to organize the round table.
The
whole morning.
I believe you need a microphone.
I could listen to
so
more
you
and
have
more.
to follow Siguela. You need a
I have a
microphone.
gift for you.
Good to see you.
In the meantime, I don't know if you need a microphone. I would like to introduce, very honored and extremely glad to have Dirk Simons with us again, joining this morning. And Dirk is a very old friend of us, of the school, and it's very special to have you with us. And we asked Dirk Simons to be a respondent for the two of you this morning. So very curious to see what would be the on-spot reactions. A little bit of a bio of Dirk. Dirk Simons, landscape architect, studied at Delft University of Technology. He worked at the Nature Conservation Unit of the Ministry of Culture, Recreation, and Social Work from 1977 until 1981. From 81 until 84, he was head of the Strategic Policy Development and Research Coordination Unit of the Ministry of Agriculture, Nature Management, and Fisheries. From 84 to 90, so it's a very long history. He was the head of Landscape Architecture Department of the Dutch Forestry Commission. From 99 until 93, he was coordinator of the Landscape Architecture Study Program of the Academy of Architecture in Amsterdam. In 1990, he was one of the 3 founders of HNS, Landscape Architects. HNS is mainly responsible for regional plans. HNS Landscape Architects received the National Prince Bernhard Cultural Award in 2001, and in 2002, Dirk has received the Rotterdam Maskant Award. I'm not going to continue because it's a very extensive bio with a very extensive list of prizes. So Dirk, thank you for joining us, and we'd like to kindly ask again to Charles Waldheim and Adrian Host to please join us. We're going to have Nikos Katsiskis, assistant professor at the section of urban design, joining Dirk in the conversation, and especially our colleague Diego Sepulveda Carmona from the section of spatial planning and strategy and part of our research group. Please.
Shall I start?
Please.
I have the mic.
Yes.
Inevitably.
Well, I wish that everybody here in the enthusiasm sketching here and say, what's this? I already have a mic. Okay. There is a very interesting link between your Dordrecht plan and the university where Charles comes from. That was the 2012 Dordrecht studio by Pierre Bélanger, who after Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, did the observation, well, everything went wrong in New Orleans. There was only one thing that was really working fine: the elevated highways that were transporting people to higher and safer places. And in studying Dordrecht, he came to the conclusion, my God, there are no plans to evacuate here in Holland. How do you do that? And I still remember that, this point was sinking in with the engineers we talked about. And that, I think, was, in the end, the start of the double, what do you call it? The double safety? No, the... Multi-level, yes, and the discussion about Japanese dikes of 200 meters, etc., etc. So in a way, thank you, Harvard, for dropping this coin. And well, I can't react as a sort of, let's say, stand-up comedian to a complete story
Eu vou
like
poder
you
só
were,
partilhar meio de
let's say, presenting here, which looks very attractive. But, well, I wish that also Chris Zevenberg and other of our civil engineering friends could react on that the Trochen will, in the end, lower the sea level before our coast. Because if that is true, I think the Nobel...
At storm, not normal, when it's
when it
northwestern
storms,
storm.
yeah.
That's what Bram Bleek speculated.
Okay.
That maybe it's better, we don't know, but this is the computer model made the evidence 1 meter drop at Vlissingen.
Yeah. But if it's true, the Nobel Prize for landscape architecture has to be added to the list of that Tanea is reading from her telephone in big capital font, because that would be extremely spectacular, of course. And I'm also very interested in, let's say, the interaction between the wind turbine parks and the sand excavation, because
we designed
that looks
that
like
as
a
a
challenge.
system.
Yeah.
The simple logic, but now we need ESA and maritime faculties in Delft. Imagine you have so much wind power on the North Sea, but it is midnight. Nobody needs the energy. Then you send it to a dredging machine, which causes turbulence at the seabed and brings water up. But it's laying there waiting for that moment. So you save energy. You don't need to save energy, just use it for land rising.
Well, it looks like a sort of perpetuum mobile
But others
of
want,
our...
because we were speculating, they said, no, you need a wave machine. Don't go wind machine, you need a wave machine. Because the wave machine, the flipper goes up and immediately make turbulence down. So you don't even need to transmit it electrically.
Yeah.
That's what we need to research with this faculty. We need funds, and ESA need to build a prototype of this new machinery. Why not?
So we need a new waterlooplab, but then not with computers, but with a real flipper.
Exactly.
Seeing how the sand is being transported by the giant flipper. Well, I'm coming back to our first speaker, and then I give the mic to you, of course. I really am impressed that indeed studying food, the food system, agriculture is an integral part of redesigning in Delta. And I think that if you look at the dashboard of planet Earth, the Rockström sort of amoeba-like figures, we already are in, let's say, overstepping the planetary boundaries for the biogeochemical cycles of nitrogen and phosphorus, but also 3 others where we are, in a way, in the red, have to do with agriculture. The land use change, the sweet water use, and of course, lately also the novel entities seems to be in the red, and that's partly because of agriculture, just a small part. But we are introducing so-called forever chemicals that won't break down, etc., etc. So the agricultural transition might be the most important one at hand. So I am really applauding you for studying that in China. But there's also always one sort of party pooper, showstopper, and that is land prices, even in China. That the problem seems to be, the urbanization can pay more per square meter for the land than agriculture does, so it sort of pushes away agriculture. Agriculture shifts towards a place where they can reclaim land again. And this is the succession that has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. So I'm very interested in how in China and Eastern Asia, you can deal with this problem where you want to bring together, let's say, the even old-fashioned agriculture with the viral Chinese urbanization. Is that one of the elements in your study, Charles?
Yeah. Thanks, Dirk, and thanks for mentioning the Belanger. I mean, obviously, TU Delft and my employer have a long history of the Belangers and the Rosetta Elkins, and there's been a long dialogue. I would say it's true. I mean, I think the agricultural portfolio is a part of the overall picture. It's not the only one, but it does cluster a number of important issues, particularly given the questions of nitrogen and carbon and those mixes. I think a part of the solution, I think also came up in Adrian's point, was not simply to try to persist with the neoliberal logic, but find some other way around that.
Yes.
You know, and in our work and what we've seen going on, the most interesting work in Asia, adding density, but with a certain quality of life. That is, can you have a certain agricultural or agrarian quality of life while reconciling that with density? Because these combination of needing more room for the river, needing more room for urbanization, and needing more room for agricultural production, and being self-sustainable, these things all are competing for land. Yeah. And so ultimately, the traditional horizontal pattern of urbanization, that very low, dense kind of horizontal tissue, is probably not the right way forward. We think you can have a kind of urbanity while reconciling that with agrarian life. That combination, and that moves us past some of the historic polarities. I guess what I was thinking about, just in reflection to what Adrian said, and I mentioned to Adrian that I wish he'd had the whole morning and he could have just continued, because I was persuaded that we should all invest in this as well. The challenges we're facing resist any traditional disciplinary boundaries. Universities are organized around disciplines. If we change our disciplines and our profession every time we have a new storm, we're lost. Having said that, if we never adapt, then what are we here for, right? And I think our institutions share that mission, which is we have to be addressing these challenges. And I think we're committed, your school and ours, to doing so through a kind of optimism, not being naive, but we have to find some ways in the future. You can call that modern, you can call it progressive, but I'm convinced that we have the technical capacity if we bring the imagination to this.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you. I'm really feel overwhelmed in this panel. I worked with Adrian 20-something years ago with Ale Hosper in the island of Schiphol. They bring this little Chilean because I create a model to control the sediment without the mangroves. And now I'm sitting here 20 years later. It's amazing. I would like to come to exactly what you both have been taking. You have been bringing us and the value of vernacular strategies that had been present, and by giving value to that, the vast casting that we were talking yesterday, we have remeasured technologically wise, and then you propose a very interesting design-related, provocative question that very probably put it, as you said, in our great university. It's a demand of multidisciplinary approaches. But also projects, are challenge what was posed yesterday, but kind of scaling up. In the proposal of that you fantastically showed to us, that recognize this enormous value of the understanding of the landscape of the species, absolutely local sensitive. And through that, you even challenge, by the phenomenological perspective, the way that the morphological expansion of these villages can reach. Immediately we pose as, well, what is this agro-landscape then? How we deal with the agro-landscape with the mega-region system that China is posing. So very probably there is a very interesting interrelation that we would like to see. In the same of Adrian, you're putting us in the mouth of the delta, which is something that for all of us is fascinating. It's the real force of nature. You use that. What is the real significance then of coming to Paulo Vigano with the whole river system? How this dependency, interdependency, can really challenge this, and to what extent that local, which is enormous, perspective is there. I would like if we can think on together in this scaling up.
Yeah, I'll hand the mic. I just, if you think about, the relationship between wind farms and, kind of submariner autonomous soil construction, I think that's a world I want to be in,
Yeah. So this is what I have been thinking. Is this really the world we want to be in? And actually, I have to say, it was really fascinating to follow both. It really made me thinking about very specific, right? The one is, so first of all, you said, you opened up by saying we are fighting. And it's like with this approach, you're just, moving the battle from. But then the question becomes, both in the sand trade that you presented as a question of CO2 emissions and how you do it, how you scale it up, and in this case, right, it's something like an equation between a sand/sediment balance and an energy balance, right? So eventually, the whole system relies upon cheap renewable energy, right? So you said if we have energy that we are not using, let's channel it there, and it solves the problem. And I have this general question actually about the promise of renewables, because it seems to actually escape with the question of the intervention. It's like if we justify that with tons of energy we can do a lot of things as long as the energy is clean, maybe we are not so much questioning the things that we are doing, right? And I wonder to what extent is it a different paradigm than 100 years ago that we tapped into a cheap form of energy, right? Fossil energy, right? And we felt this immense capacity to intervene in the landscape. No one was thinking back then about CO2 emissions and anything like that. How is it different than what we are suggesting in this paradigm? Is it a different paradigm? Because again, we need a lot of energy, and the justification is, but this time actually the energy is green, right? Do you see a contradiction there?
Yeah, for me the philosophy is different. So I think if we have an international delta exchange, I think that's very much the case these 2 days. The Dutch delta is different. So I repeat, the Dutch delta is different. Why? Because the Dutch delta is inhabited by idiots, by obsessed culture. That's the Dutch people, the Dutch culture. So we are in action with the ecosystem. That's it. So for me, this is a paradigm, a philosophical or existential paradigm. That's the domain I want to be, and that's why I'm here. And I'm from a family of engineers, so for me, it's literally, and I come from a city which is born from fighting. I mean, I cannot undo that. You understand? Mm-hmm. So this is how I see, first of all, the Dutch. Now, the university, they need to be in speculation beyond. And now the very simple thing is that the industry today is not lifting the land systematically. They even ignore it. That's one. Second, they are mining everywhere in pits wherever, in the North Sea or in Lake IJsselmeer or even in a beautiful cultural landscape. They make giant pits. Mining is devastating. And I would say the mining should work for us. Create new biotopes, safer coast, beautiful environments. And so that is the only step. And of course, that will take, for example, if you make 1 kilometer of such a gully system, per 1 kilometer, Bram Bliek and me, we calculated 200 million cubic meter of sand, which is approximately the Maasvlakte, per 1 kilometer of Dutch coast. So every kilometer of Dutch coast could give us, so we don't need to say we don't have debris. It's there, we can use it, we can pick it up. If we do it cleverly to build nature and to make us safer and to create environments for us, it's a no-brainer. So our university in 10 years should have a prototype of this kind of machinery, and we should have test pits on the Dutch shoreline. but that nobody is in action. And that's why the new, let's say this new group around Chris, I think could play a role in making the right partnership of the diverse institutions, organizing funds, and being at a ministry level as a serious project for the future. And then energy comes in, and eco comes in, and we will test and find out that we are wrong, and we have to adapt. That will come. But that's what I call, this is the pleasure of university. So I don't see the conflict of, I don't feel the pity of energy or whatever.
I want to build on this. I mean, because I take your anxiety about this. I mean, on the one hand, if we were simply engaged in decarbonizing our economy, if we could move tomorrow immediately to renewable resources of energy to simply persist in the way that we've been organized, this seems banal to me. I mean, it's important to do, of course, but ultimately there are bigger things at stake here. I understand your concern that, well, if we're simply playing defense, but the image of the idea of the Dutch polder as a kind of defensive mechanism, what I see in Adrian's proposal is kind of playing offense, right? As opposed to thinking of extraction as something which is, removal and then needs to be remediated, it's something which is bioproductive. And in that sense, I understand the muskiness of it. It's kind of adjacent to, certain conversations about terraforming and autonomy, et cetera. But in this regard, landscape architecture has benefited from these Dutch examples. The field globally is now in this kind of renaissance precisely because of the kinds of innovation that we've seen here. And in that regard, the idea that it could be bolstered with, state authority, institutional, kind of talent. One of the issues we have to discuss here is the kind of collapse of the project of spatial planning. No, I mean, precisely these places are being built at the wrong elevation, presumably because we thought the market could manage it. And this abdication you describe of the responsible technical authorities has to be amplified. No, I think we have to sign the waiver. We have to retreat and say, because otherwise we'll be held accountable for these things.
The moment where I see a lot of potential seascape architects in the hall, and a lot of hungry freaks that want to ask questions. Is that what I am supposed to do?
We have
Tanea,
space for one
give
question.
The
lucky one.
Make it a good one.
Make it a good one. Who has a question for Charles, Adrian, or the rest of the panel? There. I'll come to you. There's another mic.
My question is, I'm a civil engineer, so from your ambitious thinking of bringing sand from sea, I think this creates, already we have faced a lot of problem with the ecosystem, you know better than me. Is it feasible, or we are engaging more energy to create this kind of things which is against, again, create the climate change issues, to bringing the sand from the, because this is against the nature, you are doing something. Better, for that is multi-layer defense, you can prepare your people, your society to adapt, that you have to move from higher land when there is a big strategy, big event. So this kind of things, I think, more realistic than go for hard measures immediately, because nature is changing so much that we have to prevent with more energy than earlier. So then there will be a tipping point when we cannot prevent more. That's my fear that for your this future planning.
Thank you. But knowing my left side companion here, he will try to push that tipping point towards the future, or not.
So in general, if we say general, this is a very good strategy. However, we have no higher land. So my office is situated on the Rotterdam Docklands. It's newly built, it's fresh new, and they built it exactly on the same level as the Maaslandkering, which is one of the coastal barrier lock systems. So if there is 2 centimeter water tipping over the Maaslandkering, I'm under the water. You understand? So there is no resilient concept today in the Netherlands. Rotterdam is like 15 kilometers from Delft. This is really insane. So that we need to lift areas. We need a broader portion of sand. The other thing, what I think is a very interesting thing, 1.5 years, 2 years ago, Wageningen University, the Research Institute launched a plan that the western part of the Netherlands should be given up. The Dutch should live in Germany, become Germans. The higher grounds is completely lunatic. I mean, like the Swiss, they gave up the Alps, but then you are no Swiss anymore. You understand? And I think TU Delft is now, we are at the moment that we deliver the better scheme. And we don't give up the land and say, oh, we make a nice jolly dike around Amsterdam, and Amsterdam is floating in marshland and in tidal. That's very strange. By the way, it's not so simple because we live in democracy. Nobody will give up the land. So even scientists can make drawings, but that will not be the reality. So the engineers stand up and we save the land and make it better. The other thing, what I would like to envision, and this is very relevant to understand, the Dutch last 100 years gave up, let's say, 60% of all the tidal basins, maritime, gully systems. They are gone. They don't exist anymore. In these systems, the energy of the moon flies over the planet. There's tidal water going up and down, and there's energy in the water, and the energy is making these underwater topography systems. But the Dutch gave up 60%, but the energy stays the same. Where does the energy go? Now we are able today with computers and ecologists to speculate a system which is very close to a new equilibrium that could work for us and which is in balance with the amount of tidal energy. And if that also gives sand, we do a double job. That's why I'm on the planet. Beneficial, for free.
And maybe this next step will be the demolition of the Delta works and give these girls the possibility to again new gullies, etc., etc.
Yeah, but not from our research budget. That's the next budget.
That's another faculty. So, Tanea, are we supposed to stop now?
Unfortunately, yes. This should stay.
I think he is the guest of honor.
Yeah, we owe him the microphone.
Please.
Or about the same old time doing stuff. So we are already well on our way. 12 specific projects are realized along the Dutch coast.
Well, what do we do now, Tanea?
Now we go for a coffee break.
A coffee break. Okay, sounds like a very good idea.
It was fun. Great.
who just very recently, 15 minutes ago, arrived from Switzerland here in Delft. A great pleasure to have you with us today in this session dedicated to design, and we hope to be going to be extremely inspired by your work. So Bas, it's an artist and photographer living and working in Rotterdam and recently in Zurich. He was educated as industrial designer at the Design Academy in Leuven and later studied architecture at the Berlage Institute in Rotterdam. Since then, through the use of photography, his work focuses on urban landscape and transformation, researching the various forms, outcomes, and imaginaries of urban space. In May 2004, he published his first book, Artificial Arcadia, with 010 publishers, and following several publications. In 2004, he won the Charlotte Cooley Prize for promising young artists and architects in the Netherlands, and at 2010 Venice Biennale of Architecture, he was awarded the Silver Lion for his collaborative work with Office Carson Hirtz, David Van Seven. But it's a great pleasure to have you here. Thank you,
Tanea, for the nice invitation. And well, it's nice to be back somehow, to be back in Holland, where I grew up, where I still have my studio, but where I spent, unfortunately, way too little time. I always like to start with the studio. This is the studio in Rotterdam. Just for you to understand, I'm an artist, I'm not an architect. I studied architecture, but I abandoned it immediately. I'm not good in collaborating. I'm not good in giving orders to people. I would like to do things myself. But I understood very quickly that within the world of architecture, there are a lot of interesting ideas and problems, and let's say also problems with image. And problems with image I find interesting. So this is the studio. There's a picture hanging that was exhibited in Venice. Ja, dan moet misschien even maybe the microphone has to go a bit louder. Okay. This is not for the audience. Okay, sorry. This is the outside of the studio. The studio is there, so it's in Rotterdam. By now, the nice ship has changed, and it's now our Ukrainian. Well, it's not refugees, so they are the place where they now live. So they pass in front of the window when I'm there. It's a very, all of a sudden, all these things come very close. But you also see that this relation of the studio and the relation, maybe this is already the delta, is a quite particular one. It's not always what you expect. And I'm going to talk a little bit because I don't do a lot of work on the delta, but I do a lot of work on representation. The only work that I did on the Dutch landscape is a work that I did when I was still a designer, or when I was graduating as a designer for public space in a school called the Design Academy. Then it was not yet called the Design Academy. It's called Artificial Arcadia. And I was about to graduate, and I was making a travel every weekend to my parents. I'm coming from the south of Holland, from the sandy grounds. And I started to notice that the things that I thought were very normal, so things like this, so you see a group of people standing in a forest and you see another person there, things that I thought were absolutely normal were maybe not as normal as I imagined them to be. And I started to research all these places. So what are these places? These production forests that to me were nature, which of course is a bit idiotic. Now I'm living in Switzerland, I understand there's also different versions of nature. And then you have these groups of people, in this case, clay pigeon shooters that are there. But why are they there? Why are they allowed to be there? And I started to do this kind of research into these places, and it's always happening in the forests, in the production forest, because they are not economically used anymore, and they are in between the kind of small villages that are strewn around. At first I thought I had to map them, so I was sitting on a spot, drawing what was happening, what was going on. Somehow that was not enough. At least as a designer, it was not enough. So I started to go to more of these places, and I started to understand, yeah, there are reasons why people are on a certain spot. So here we have a former airfield. We have a former airfield, Eindhoven. And in the top you see a kind of camping. But the camping is not a camping. The camping in this case is a religious a music festival. And they are there because the noise regulations of the airport, even though the airport is not there, are still there. So the noise contours of the airport are still in place. Same is, that's the only picture. You always have to have one exception in a book, so that's the exception. It's not in Holland, it's in Belgium. It's a former marble quarry that is being used as a fantastic swimming pool. So I started to understand that these people that are in the landscape, they have knowledge that I, as a designer for public space, do not have. And why do I not have that? While I'm supposed to design these places, and why do I not have that? So these people are, I'm standing, by the way, on a golf course, and I'm photographing a little in between two golf courses. And these people are with the full packaging on, walking in that strange landscape. And I was asking them, what are you doing? They said, we are practicing. I said, what are you practicing? We are practicing to go to Ireland on a holiday. And the thing to get closest to Ireland is a golf course. And then they would go from golf course to golf course and walk around. Here another noise landscape where these things are allowed. So it's this is a former quarry, of course, former military site with the perfect more than 20 years ago. It's a former motocross track, which is being reused for something I don't know. And more. And more. And when I came here, it started to become more interesting to me as a designer. So I was photographing them very seriously. As a photographer, I was looking at people like Hans Aarsman at that time, who were also writing very beautiful little stories about how the landscape is being used. And then I was here, and they started to explain me what they were doing. So they are doing this trial crossing. Okay, I'm not a big fan, but doesn't matter. So I was asking, but why are you doing it here? Yeah, it's a friend of ours. He has this rubble dump for a big waste of buildings, and we are allowed to use it. Okay, nice. And then I said, but don't you get bored after a while? It's always the same. No. When he has new rubble, he calls us to ask where we want it. Then I realized this is an interesting way. They have found a way to alter the landscape, but also to know what you can do in this landscape. This is the future high-speed train where, I don't know, there's some kind of people hanging out to be in the fog. With these photographs, I graduated as a designer for public space. There was a bit of debate, obviously, I think, because I explained that these pictures were proposals for public space. I'm proposing, I'm saying, I'm standing here, I'm organizing the whole space. This is how you can use it. The question was, of course, but why don't you then design these kind of places? But if you start to design them, maybe they will not be used anymore. So I started to figure out that there's this contradiction between what you can see and what you can do and what you can do as a designer. Then I moved from, after graduating, I moved to the Berlage Institute to study architecture. But secretly, I just wanted to photograph the harbor. So I did the same thing. I became I became accustomed with the harbor, and I started to photograph. So here you see a paintball game on a light-polluted dump site, And it's actually the Rotterdam planning office that was doing the paintballing. So even they knew what to do with the land that was actually not supposed to be used. A few people who already had written about these kind of things. I mean, Adrian was writing Accelerating Darwin. I knew all these texts, but I wanted to see it for myself, and I wanted to understand these things, maybe not as anecdotes of what people were doing, but I wanted to understand why and how do they know what is hidden in this landscape. So he knows that he can hang there for an hour, and only there. These guys, the wave servers, they know that if the wind comes from a certain direction, the underwater channel pushes the water this way, and only on this 50, 60 meter wide piece of the Maasvlakte, if the wind is from the right direction, you get waves that are twice as high as on other spots. So they had figured it out 20 years ago without internet, without all these things, and they knew, and they could read the landscape in a way that I, as a designer, could not. Oh. Well, the kind of, I always call it the Tintin diving, and by the way, you have to have your friends turn because otherwise you're not insured. Sometimes to go in between two dunes, hoping that the wind will funnel enough to make you lift off. Maasvlakte is also a fantastic place for bird watching. All these things, they collide, obviously. And it's the end of the highway. And I figured out the end of the highway means it's a destination. People go on the highway and they drive until the end. When they're at the end, they get out and they say, we're there. And they go back in and they go home. And this is a Peugeot 205, which was still possible then. They were doing burnout sessions together. They were very afraid of my camera. They came 3 times up to check if I was not police, because I'm standing there, of course, quite close with the big camera. This is called surf casting. It's people who don't like fishing, but like throwing, and like throwing as far as possible or as precise as possible. And they also figured out they can only do it on the Maasvlakte because this zone has no regulation on it. This landscape has no regulation. This means if their piece of lead breaks, which happens, it flies far away, and normally in any other spot they cannot find it anymore, and then they're polluting the land, and it's not allowed. But here, there is no regulation, so here it's allowed. So they all come to this spot. These are a set of bird watchers, which the bird is in the middle, but you don't see it. Which I found because there were like 5 really boring cars overtaking me way too fast. So I followed them. And then, so this is all done with kind of early warning systems on SMS. So before smartphones, before all of this. The sand quarry on the Maasvlakte, where you have 3, 4, 5 different types of soil, which they also know that there are these 5 types, and then on one day they can do multiple runs. And the most fun is, of course, to stand still. I mean, also here you already start to see that the aesthetics is not just documentary. There is a kind of an inherent relation to Dutch landscape depicting, let's put it like that. Here we have the protest against the new harbor in Amsterdam on 31st of December 1999, so one day before the millennium. And on the night, the Tower of Babel would be put on fire. So this is the protest for, I think, Ruigoord it was, if I'm not mistaken. And then later, of course, I found Jan van Gooyen. I was really surprised. I didn't even know the relation was so close. And also, I started to realize when I was looking at this picture, of course, it's a highly contemporary landscape. It's a super technological landscape that he was painting. It's the techno-fix of the 17th century. Because in the beginning, I was a bit afraid. What is it? A nostalgic kind of representation? No, I think it's very precise. It's precise in time. And the last one here I want to show is, well, I love this picture, and I know Dirk has it even. I don't know if you still have it, but it was in the office, in the lunch room. The reserve pylon, which of course was never used because it was not necessary. And then it was reused as an artificial climbing hill. So you see little things to walk on and a little net, and you have to pull yourself away. So this idea that the technology, well, everything that we make will become something else in any case. And then we have to know what to do with it. So when I finished this series of photographs, I decided to make, I tried very hard to make a book, which in the end became this book, Artificial Arcadia. And I would say it's still a book not me as an artist or a photographer. It's really a book where I was still a designer, trying to answer questions. Why do people know more than me as a designer? How can we design landscapes like this? And then I asked 5 authors. Well, also Dirk was one of them. So they got one question that came from the research that I was doing, which was always about this idea of why do people use it? What does it mean for design? Can we use it in the future? And then they would write the essay after my question, not even so much after the pictures. The pictures were the kind of illustration. And this was very interesting. In this case, I think it's Wim Kuijvers, who's quite a radical Belgian architect, who in the end wrote an essay called "Leisure Kills Public Space," saying, whoever comes first, they will put the stick in the ground, and if the stick is in the ground, the next person will come to say, but here you can now only do 4x4. You cannot anymore walk your dog, because that's then dangerous. If all this happens, the place is not anymore public. I mean, he's quite radical, very interestingly radical, saying that publicness means you can do whatever you want on a spot without that anyone tells you what you're allowed to do or not. You have to tell me today how long more. Huh? Then I moved away from Holland, and I started first I started to photograph cities. Here is a set of photographs. So I did it for 6-7 years. A set of pictures from a series on the Middle East, exhibited in the Barbican. And after that, I decided we moved to Singapore. So this is a picture from, I think it's Tekong, the extension of the airport, and you see all the small boats that are bringing sand, and in the back you see Indonesia. And in Singapore, I started to understand that these cities, they are monsters. I don't need to represent cities. They are able to take care of themselves. I don't have to glorify them. I don't have to make better pictures for people to understand what's happening. No, they will manage. They will grow. We will not be able to stop that. And at that time, which coincided with also the change from analog to digital, I decided maybe these are the last pictures of, well, what we could say in this audience for sure, progress. So of things that you can make, things that are artificial, things that have power because we conquer them. So here we see one more from Singapore. This is the underground oil cavern where they can store, 5 mega tankers of oil as a strategic reserve, which is half known but also half hidden. It was very, very difficult to enter. to get in. And in the end, it's a nice space, nice picture, but okay, not so much more. I started to work more, well, what I did already a lot of times, if I'm not sure what to do, I turn my back and I photograph the other way. In this case, I started to photograph nature. I started to be interested in nature and how nature is being depicted and what you can do in a kind of architectural or art setting with it. I'm also starting to photograph artifacts that deal with that problem. So we were asked, so me and Office here van Severen, since we work a lot together, we were asked to make a proposal for outside artwork in Brussels, in the area where Peter Bruegel used to paint. And it was supposed to be for half a year. I decided very quickly, I always, when I go to Boijmans, I always go to Tower of Babel, and I always go very close, and it's very nice. So could I not ask to photograph? This is also complicated, to ask to photograph something like this, because I have wanted to be really close. You have a person next to you for the whole afternoon who says you can move the camera, you can now make the picture. Let me look. Yes, now it's okay. It's a very strange experience, but I tried to go through the painting as if I'm walking in a landscape. So we all know the painting. And then you start to understand, if you have pieces of 3 by 4 centimeters, you start to understand there is a clearing of the land, so cutting of the trees. Then the first kiln is coming in the archaic landscape. More kilns, but still much more landscape. Then the kind of starting of the building of the tower. I was very impressed by the fact that he painted the brick in the same way as the leaves. So the leaves are transformed from green to red, and that's it. No, it's a kind of a perfect transformation only in color, and you understand immediately what he means. The ghosts are appearing who are going to build, more kilns are being made, a whole island is deforested, as we do, sand is being quarried, and the tower goes up and it's ugly when it goes up. You have the tower full of way too small people who don't know what they did. Very beautiful. Proposed to use these pictures in an installation, a large installation, a circle in a forest, printed on fabric, testing, because I thought it would be interesting to bring it back. And since I'm living in Switzerland, I don't know if you know what happens in Switzerland if you build a building. You have to first put sticks of the outline of the building so the neighbors can see what will come. And I was interested to have the sticks and to have the representation. So we decided it should be a circle. Immediately we understood we did a stupid thing because you have to measure the whole forest if you want to put a perfect circle inside. So we did that. This is the whole setup. And this is just after we finished. So I'm standing on top of the circle in this case. And it created this really weird thing that you can be in a painting in a very, very, very different way. That it's a place. You see different things. You don't see the whole painting ever. You only see details. Quite a successful way to put an image back in a space. Outside was silver, so when you would come to the place, it would look like an object that is standing in the forest. If you would pass through it, you would be in the forest and you would only have this kind of details of color to which you have to walk. I think there's a movie, so we can see that. a bit clumsy, but I like that somehow. But you can feel that, yeah, it's like being in space. It's not looking at something. I think these things are very important. There are 2 more projects behind, but you will have to wait for another time.
Are we allowed or not? No. Yes?
Okay, one more.
I'm
Good.
meeting you in the middle.
So it was also made one more time, not in the forest. It was made in the same scale in Ahoy by Boymans, which was very funny. You had to go by car under it. So the pictures are now inside. Also, a bit since Saskia is here, and Saskia was the director of Bureau Europa at the time when we did a small project. A small, but for me, in the end, a significant project. There was an exhibition going to happen on Cedric Price, and Jan Nauta and Saskia, they asked me, can you photograph something of Cedric Price? But something of Cedric Price, there's only one building, which is not even a building. So should I now go photograph that building? Well, I'm not so sure. But when I was in the Berlage, I remembered that every time when there was a kind of a dirty industrial site that had to be renewed, everyone would yell, Pottery Stinkbelt, that's the example. The example is Pottery Stinkbelt, we have to look at that. So I remembered that, and I thought, well, it would be interesting to go and see Pottery Stinkbelt. In my naivety, I didn't know that the project was, well, it was a real project for a real space, but that was about it. So here we have Cedric Price's site photos. This is what he calls site photos. So the change of air suits me well. It's Stoke-on-Trent, always merry and bright. When Stoke stokes, when Potter spot, it's Stoke-on-Trent. Fantastic, kind of a really fantastic. So you probably all know the project. So the project is in a way, well, as we know the project, it's this kind of weird diagram. And somehow it's never clear what the project is. Is the project happening inside? Is it happening outside? Is it only the rail line? Is it? So this is interesting. I also didn't understand it. I just always thought, there's going to be a full revitalization of the whole thing. And then you have photographs like this in the archive, which remind very much of the Bechers, somehow, of the German landscape that was photographed by Bernard Dela Becher. These are the proposals. And then I remember, this is the image that I know. If I think of Pottery Stinkbelt, this is the image, the kind of a site photograph drawn over kind of half-imaginary project, which is very unclear, and that's then fantastic. I'm not sure, but let's see. So I understood this is the Medley transfer site, and together with Jan, I went to that site to photograph, for the exhibition, to photograph the site. Let's see what happens. So this is what happened. So I photographed the Medley transfer site, which is by now a fantastic line in the landscape. You could almost argue, well, probably Price would have really not minded if this would have been the outcome in the end. And this is the exhibition, and there is still supposed to become a book. Well, the book is ready, but there's no publisher. So the book should be on the side, so you have two eyes, more or less, that are looking at you, that are the central perspectives. And then I went to CCA to verify if the picture, because I'm photographing things that other people do not know, that they only know from internet, that the picture, the collage really exists. So I went to CCA, asked for the paper. They gave it to me, I photographed it, and that would be the end of the book. And as a last thing, we installed it as an installation in Chicago Biennale, again, together with Office. So thank you very much. And
this is always a very difficult task to be the clock checker and to stop such a beautiful presentation. Thank you. So I'd like to invite now our next speaker, Saskia van Stein, which is there. So Saskia is the director of the International Architecture Biennale Rotterdam. She's also the headmaster of the Critical Inquiry Lab at the Design Academy in Eindhoven. Van Stein is a moderator, curator, writer, and has been general director at Bureau Europe, Europa, platform for architecture and design in Maastricht. Van Stein worked, I'm going through, it's a very extensive bio, so I have to cut, unfortunately.
I can tell something about myself. Maybe
well,
we can, yeah.
Please.
Sorry, go ahead.
Please. She has an ardent social and cultural commitment and is actively involved in many debates on art, architecture, and design, both as a participant, writer, and as a moderator. As an educator, she has frequently involved in guest lecturing and was chair of the jury of the Prix de Rome in 2014, jury member of the Princess Margaret Award for Culture, part of the International Jury Dutch Design Awards, and involved in the Pierre Bailey 2015 Prize for Architecture Critique. She's a board member of several advice committees, such as from The Hague, Dance Company Gotra, Joost Vrandstaerts, and well, it continues. It's an amazing bio. Saskia, it's a great pleasure and honor to have you with us in such a busy time, so thank you for being with us
Thank
today.
you for having me. Is this working? Fantastic. So I thought I'd start a bit anecdotal. Since this is about representation, it might be good to share some thoughts on representation. First of all, I feel extremely indebted to and honored to have two of the chief curators of the biennial in one room. One is sitting in front, one in the back. As said, my name is Saskia van Stein. It's beautiful to hear these stories about yourself, but maybe whenever I think of The Hague, I think of the first debate I organized. And it was, I read a very small article in the newspaper stating that IKEA was suing the municipality of Delft. And I thought, what is going on? We're talking 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And this is where I started to get interested in this correlation between maybe power structures, representation, and politics of maybe anything to do with jurisdiction or the socio-economic aspects. I started to organize debates for the Unie in Rotterdam, and this is where Aaron Betsky, then director, picked me up and he said, literally, you seem to have an opinion, come and work for us. The first exhibition I made was with Bas Prinsen. So somehow we're in a sort of strange, deep time where he has just shown the marvelous pictures of artificial Arcadia. And why am I sharing this anecdote also is when we talk about representation, I think we're on a very interesting quest for transmission of meaning. And the way Bas speaks about his work and the way he makes these pictures come to life is obviously what it's about. And I remember our dialogue, and it's an ongoing dialogue, on how much information do you need to give in order for these pictures to come alive. And that says something about, let's say, the dialectic between word and image. And it also says something about what does it mean to be an author or an audience. And I'm hoping to sort of touch upon these things because I do we are maybe losing a potentiality of connectivity. Maybe not so much with the people in this room. We know how to talk to each other and how to find each other. But how can we amplify those conversations. So this is my task, to amplify the conversation about design. I have the VVV. I decided to not be too intellectual as the director of the IABR. The V, the first one, is about connectivity, verbinden. The second one is about verbeelden, the imagination. I'm also involved in a PhD on Walt Disney, and Walt says, imagination is the model of which reality is built. And I fundamentally believe that we are redefining the model of how we live at this moment. Anything from democracy, hopefully also through finance. So these systemic changes ask for bold answers. And the third V is verandering, change, because we are changing. We all know it. We might not know where we're heading exactly, but it's definitely coming. And I'm actually quite positive at the moment, let's say. I don't know, let me start by that. Maybe it's a cruel positivity, but still. So, new directorship comes with a new logo. This is somewhere between the painter's easel, how does that, pedestal? Easel, thank you so much. One could see a little bit of a Inuit tipi in it, or maybe an anarchist, or a new crypto coin. I leave it up to you. It's not finished, but Studio Richard Niese did a marvelous job as far as I'm concerned. I'm not going to talk about water, but we did a lot of water, and it's mainly much to credit my predecessor, Mr. George Brugmans, that he really picked up on this topic, and still till today considered the most, in quantitative sense, successful one, of course, the flood, the zonvloed. There's been addressing the delta, so how can our knowledge and systemic knowledges on drought, on surplus, and on the quality of our water be somehow connected to each other. Obviously, the Water of Leverage program, which I'm sure you heard about yesterday, for which I apologize not being there, but I had a graduation show, also important. And of course, the high ground in Dordrecht, a beautiful attempt to understand spatial planning and the rise of the sea level with different, I'm not going to go into these projects, but just to show that there's proof in the pudding that, in fact, the conversation on how we will deal with the consequences of climate change are very much embedded in the architecture biennial. Marco Vermeulen. The Waterweek, we just had a beautiful conversations going from what does it mean to dwell on water, so floating houses, all the way to the politics and poetics of territory. So if there's anything about my signature, I hope to connect the practicalities of building, thinking about architecture in the landscape, to the politics and poetics of it. So just the culture, maybe. I try to connect these two worlds that I would say is typical to my work. I hope, I heard Dirk Loorbach was here. I hope he didn't speak too much about the biennial, because I thought I'd maybe hint a little bit at the next one. It's about time. Literally, we try to assess what value time could add, or different velocities of time in the design process. I think the return on investment on some buildings is by now 5 years, even if it's just the facade, but this is something I find quite daunting. For those of you into graphic identity, this is by Stahl Aar. It is a Berlin-based graphic design studio, and they used hazard signs, but in a positive manner. These are the curators. I was confronted with Dirk Loorbach as the appointed curator, and I thought, well, if there's anything that I'm known for, then it's my collaborative effort. Some of you might know my work, Vacant NL, where we addressed vacancy in 2012 in the Dutch Pavilion together with Raaf. 7,000 floating blue objects, an inverted Nolly map. So I love to collaborate in order to cross-contaminate. And so I said, Dirk, I really want somebody from the field, and I wanted to center stage landscape. I asked Peter Veenstra of Lola Landscapes to add. And there's the second iteration that I thought, how come a biennial is always oriented towards a certain sense of agency and towards newness and the future? So I asked 2 architecture historians in order to maybe guide the way to the near future. So this is the group. And we pick up on limits to growth. We're 50 years down the line of the well-known book. Anybody have it at home here? Yes? Ah, perfect. Because the Netherlands was the country that sold the most copies, 4.5 million editions. So now, 50 years later, books like We Were Warned, in fact, are surfacing. But we touch upon 1972 in order to measure where we are now, and we will look forward also. So the limits to growth, very, very briefly, because I know I'm among people that might know much more about it. But what I find very, very inspiring is the fact that it was Volkswagen who financed all of this. So this is something that I think the challenge for the future is actually also to build new coalitions. Oopsa. And the Volkswagen financed this attempt by a group of collaborators to work at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute for Technology, to reflect and predict the future. And maybe, yeah, one more? Okay. And what they did is actually use the computer to predict 12 scenarios, just tweaking notions of resources, population growth, food. Well, I would say very much at the center of our conversation still until today. The 12 scenarios are sort of presumably neutral. There's no such thing as neutrality, but still, we are on the most dystopic scenario, right on track, as you can tell. But is there hope? I just wanted to sort of, that's a pity. To 8 minutes 40, please. Only 2 minutes of video. This is a video made by the BBC in 1972. Highly recommendable. Scary, utopic, but beautifully in sync with our time. And for those of you who are not really in the know about what transition management is in the sense as Dirk Loorbach puts it, I know he was here yesterday, but I just want to share that, first of all, we talk about different worlds. When he talks about design, it's not the design I talk about. So there's also something there that we really need to work on how to find each other in the language. But what just to very briefly sketch how he puts it is, we jumped from the cart and carriage and horses to the car, from the car all the way to, of course, mobility and decentralization infrastructure, to toxic masculinity, to, okay, we're making the shift. End of fossil fuels, we'll have an e-car. And the position of Dirk is then we need to share that e-car, which is very radical because, of course, we built a whole culture around mobility, dealing with notions of freedom, dealing with ownership. So that's actually the design challenge, not so much the e-bike, it's the e-mobility itself. It's changing our own cultural perception in these notions. Okay, I'll run through. We have aimed to, these are all, of course, images you know. How we speak about the urgencies. Is the language maybe part of either the problem or the solution? We have three protagonists, the the ancestor, who indeed looks back and forward in order to shelter our heritage. The accelerator, I think this is the very Dutch model, where we lean into technology as a possibility. And the activist is very common-based, hyper-local, usually working with the community. A little sneak peek, this is where we'll have the exhibition, both symbol and metaphor of the end of fossil fuels. It's a monument, a gasometer. It was only in use for 6 years, which also says a lot, but we are aiming to create a landscape, a rather dystopic landscape. We had an open call, amazing amount of 400 people actually jumping in. And as said, we'll look backward in order to look forward. A timeline connecting the topics we know now of to the future. Contemporary landscape connecting weather, climate, and patterns with migratory patterns. Future scenarios, here we will be working with the state architects and Planbureau voor de Leefomgeving. How does that translate? The environmental agency, thank you so much. And I don't know, no, we're streaming it, so I won't get too political, no. But I can only say that we've been asked to put some agency into that conversation about water in the Netherlands. Also working on the international level, generating essays on temporality. Something that I care about a lot is this next generation, how well they find their stage, and particularly because of the last 5 years. Nobody saw any exhibitions. I'm grossly exaggerating, but we'll devote a whole exhibition to the future generation. Then, so this was representation, and now another part of the biennial is, of course, design research. And we are trying to look for, again, in collaborations that could be meaningful. Adrian and I just had a very short conversation that I was interviewed for Vers Beton and the magazine based in Rotterdam. And I'm always in shock. In that sense, I'm not such a public figure yet. When you say something and you see it in the newspaper, and I literally state that the field is fragmented and we really need to reconnect to each other. Both the designers, but also policymakers, and particularly the market party. So we're doing this with some research, and we have some points of reference. So radical change for desirable futures. This is the story of Dirk Loorbach. You project into the desirable future and work back. So this backcasting is, I think, a way to go. Duplicate and scalability. Maybe determine a different role for design and designers. Let's say, involve the whole chain of events. I already said this. And these are a few projects that we're working on. And maybe just to share also what the image, because when we talk about representation, there's also the image of the profession that we should be taking into account. And I was in fact quite shocked that 2 municipalities did not want to work with architects. So landscape architects, yes, but architects, no. Literally, they said it out loud. And that has to do with this sense of basically, what they said is they don't want any mooimakerij, no beautiful imagery. They want pure engagement. Maybe we'll talk about that in the Q&A. So, and then our idea is also to set up a club of Rotterdam, of course, where we are based. I want to share with you one last project that we launched yesterday in the new institute, and I'll translate it. It is an initiative to generate maybe the tongues, as we say, to be a bit vulgar. Vulgare in the Latin sense is just actually close to the street to a certain extent, right? So not your academic position. But we decided to start a ministry of making. And this Ministry of Making is a collaborative effort between multiple partners. So there's media, education, an architecture firm, and us as a sort of cultural postillon d'amour. And we zoom into the fact that we are, of course, in dire need, although the opinions are shifting on that, of housing, affordable housing. And yes, thank God, it's on the political agenda again, that we need to change. At least I'm very happy that that climate and energy and infrastructure and water and economy and is all in the political realm. But how? How will we connect all these different domains? And what can architecture do? So, as you see, we made a little bit of a graphic novel where our minister, in fact, really asks for help. And he asks for help with our colleagues in order to basically determine, and now I'm going to the test kit, where and how we can facilitate the changes we need in order to get ready for the questions of the end of this century. And we've asked 101 architects to collaborate, and they will receive a test kit of 1 by 1 meter with 10,000 houses, with 10,000 trees, with 5,000 trees, excuse me, sand, of course, in order to the absorption, a test kit on how you can use it, obviously in metaphor of. All the local architecture institutes can become the GGD, so they can be the portal for questions on local specificities. And we have 5 questions on different scales that we ask all the partners involved. We are hoping to actually connect everything on postal codes. And of course, this part of the exhibition will also be presented during the architecture biennial. So this is, of course, it's a playful way to get everybody back on board in order to address the questions that are on the horizon. Very short, but thank you for the attention and look forward to the discussion, and do ask me some